I woke up before the sun that morning, not because anyone asked me to, but because my body still remembered what it felt like to be useful. Ha ha ha. Funny how habits stay even after respect leaves. And as I stood in that quiet kitchen, I told myself this would be a normal morning, just breakfast, nothing special, nothing dramatic, just eggs, toast, coffee, the kind of morning that doesn't ask questions. My hands moved slowly because I wanted it to look nice, not fancy, just cared for. The eggs cooked gently, not rushed. I flipped them once and waited. The toast popped up and I smiled a little at the sound. Ah. I even wiped the counter twice even though it was already clean, because sometimes you clean not for dirt but for calm. And while I poured the coffee, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Same face, same tired eyes. But still hoping, which is strange when you think about it, hoping in a house where you've already learned to stay quiet. But I carried the tray carefully, steady, like balance mattered, like one wrong step might spill more than coffee. And when I reached the table, my son was already there scrolling on his phone, not looking up, not even a good morning, just the sound of his finger sliding across glass. His wife sat beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. The kind of eyes that look through you instead of at you. I set the tray down gently, eggs first, toast beside it, coffee placed just right, and I waited, not standing tall, not bowing either, just waiting. And that's when she poked the eggs with her fork, chewed once, stopped, her face twisted like I had insulted her on purpose. "What is this?" she said, loud enough to fill the room. Then she laughed, not a soft laugh, not a nervous one, but that sharp kind, ha ha ha, the kind that lands on your chest. And before I could say anything, she stood up, walked to the trash, and dumped the plate inside. Eggs sliding, toast landing face down like it had lost a fight. She didn't even close the lid, just turned back and looked at me. "What are you even good for?" she said, like she was asking the room, not me. And my son laughed too, not big, just enough to agree. Just enough to let her know he wouldn't stop her, sigh. And that sound hurt more than the words, because words can be ignored but laughter means permission. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I knew nothing I said would land. My throat felt tight but my hands stayed steady. I picked up the napkin she dropped and placed it back on the tray, smoothed the tablecloth where it had wrinkled, small movements, quiet ones. The kind that don't invite attention, and I reached for my son's plate, untouched, still warm. "I'll clean this," I said softly, but she waved her hand like shooing a fly. "Leave it," she said. "She needs to learn, and learn what exactly? How to disappear better, how to take up less air, how to pretend you don't hear yourself being erased." I turned toward the sink. The water ran hot, too hot, but I didn't move my hand away. The plate clinked once against the basin. And behind me I heard them start talking again like I'd never been there, plans, jokes, something about someone else's life. Their voices floated easily, free, and I thought, this isn't new, the tone, the smirks. The way he lets her say what he won't, but something felt different today. Heavier, like a door closing quietly somewhere inside me. I dried the dishes slowly, lined them up perfectly, everything back in place. Except for a small receipt I folded and slipped into my sleeve without thinking, just instinct, the kind you don't question until later. Upstairs the floor creaked as they moved, laughter again, and I picked up the tray. Wiped it clean even though it already was. My fingers didn't shake, that surprised me. Because usually they do, but not today. Today my body felt calm in a way that didn't feel safe, it felt decided. I carried my own bowl of soup toward the dining room a little later, steam rising, comfort in my hands, and she looked up, glanced at the table, then at me. "No more chairs," she said. "Can you eat in the laundry nook?" And she didn't wait for an answer, just turned back to her plate, and my son didn't look up at all, not once, not even when I stood there too long, the bowl warm against my palms. The room loud with conversation that didn't include me, so I stepped back, slow, careful, walked down the hallway, into the small space they'd pointed out before, closed the door gently behind me, click, not locked, just closed. And I sat on the folding stool, the bowl cooling, the light dim, and I breathed out slowly, watched the steam fade, watched the window fog a little, and in that quiet space I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. A blue notebook tucked between detergent bottles, old, bent at the corners, the one I used to write grocery lists years ago. I picked it up, opened to a blank page, and wrote the date, then one line: dinner, no seat, laundry stool. My pen moved easily, no shaking, no hesitation, and that scared me more than the laughter earlier, because sadness shakes you, but clarity doesn't. Clarity sits still. I listened to their voices through the wall, muffled, careless. And I added another line: no eye contact, no space for me. Then I closed the notebook, folded my napkin neatly over my knees, smoothed my clothes like I still belonged to myself, and I thought, maybe this morning wasn't just about breakfast, maybe it was about seeing something clearly for the first time, not the insult, not the trash, not the laughter, but the quiet truth underneath all of it. That this house had already decided who I was, and I had just decided I wouldn't agree, not out loud, not today, but soon. And as I sat there listening to them laugh upstairs, unaware, I realized something else too. Something small but sharp, like a pin you don't feel until you move. This wasn't the moment everything changed. this was the moment everything started, and they had no idea what was already moving without them. I didn't stay in that laundry nook long after the soup went cold, not because anyone called me back, they didn't, but because sitting still too long makes thoughts louder. And mine were already starting to line up in ways I wasn't used to, so I stood, rinsed the bowl carefully, wiped the spoon twice even though once was enough, and moved through the house quietly. The way you do when you're trying not to remind people you exist. The hallway lights flickered once overhead, the sound soft but noticeable. And I stepped over a pair of shoes left in the middle of the floor like obstacles no one expected me to avoid. Upstairs, the door to the room I used to sleep in sat closed. I reached for the handle without thinking, turned it, and felt it spin loose in my hand. No click, no give, just that empty turning motion, again and again, like it wasn't connected to anything anymore. Sigh, I stood there longer than I should have, fingers resting on the metal, feeling the cold seep in until I understood what that meant, not that it was broken, but that it had been decided. I walked back downstairs and found her at the counter wiping crumbs into her palm. I said quietly that the handle wasn't working. She didn't look up, just shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, Trevor noticed that earlier, like it had happened on its own, like doors just stop opening sometimes. Maybe just stay in the utility room tonight," she added, still not looking at me. "It's safer, no stairs, safer, ha. That word landed strange, because I knew what she meant wasn't safety, it was convenience. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because nodding keeps things moving, and I carried my blanket downstairs to the small room that smelled like cardboard and bleach, unfolded the narrow cot, dust puffing up when it hit the floor. And I stood there a moment with my hand on the doorframe, feeling the house hum around me, pipes ticking, dryer cooling, someone upstairs laughing again, rearranging furniture by the sound of it, heavy thuds, light laughter. Like the house was already being reshaped without me in mind, I sat on the cot, blanket over my knees, didn't lie down yet, just sat and listened, because listening tells you things people don't mean to share. And I noticed how comfortable they sounded, how settled, like nothing had happened that morning, like trashing a meal and laughing at someone's usefulness was just another Tuesday. And that's when something in me shifted again, not anger, not sadness, but distance, the kind that makes you see patterns instead of moments. I reached into the pocket of my sweater and felt the folded receipt still there, thin paper, sharp edge. I hadn't planned to keep it, it just followed me. And when I pulled it out and smoothed it open, I saw it wasn't for groceries like I'd assumed. It was from a boutique I'd never stepped into, dated 2 days ago, paid with a card that made my chest tighten just a little. Because it looked familiar, too familiar, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. People misplace things, receipts get mixed up, but the timing sat wrong, the feeling didn't pass, so I opened the cabinet at the bottom of the room. The one they never touched because it was my mess, and found the small lock still intact, still closed. I reached into my pocket again, pulled out the thin silver key I'd kept for years, turned it, and the drawer slid open smoothly. Inside were papers folded neatly, clear sleeves, labels in my own handwriting, the kind you write when you don't trust memory alone, and right on top was a bank statement I hadn't looked at in months. I sat back on the cot and read slowly, not scanning, really reading dates, amounts, places, and my stomach went still, not tight, just still, because the pattern was suddenly obvious, charges in places I'd never been. Withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing, small at first, then larger, spaced just far enough apart to feel accidental, until they didn't. It wasn't clever, it was confident. That's what scared me. Confidence only comes when someone believes they won't be questioned. I flipped through more pages, older statements, the same pattern repeating, and I remembered moments I'd brushed off, her saying she'd run errands for me, my son offering to handle things, my card missing for a day then reappearing like magic, me telling myself I must have forgotten, because forgetting is easier than suspecting your own child. Upstairs I heard a drawer slam, then another. Voices sharper now, not angry, just busy, planning, rearranging, like people who believe they're building something permanent, and I closed the drawer gently, locked it again, not because I was done, but because I didn't need more proof yet. Just confirmation. I lay down on the cot fully this time, blanket pulled higher, eyes open, staring at the underside of the stairs, the hum of the fridge seeping through the walls, my mind replaying small moments from the past months. Her casual tone when asking me to sign things, my son's habit of not meeting my eyes when money came up, the way they spoke about the house like it was already theirs, even though no one had ever said it out loud, and I thought, maybe that's how people take things now, not by force, not with yelling, but by slowly acting like it's already done. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid, but because my brain was busy connecting dots it had ignored on purpose before, and when morning came and the house woke up without checking if I had, I knew something else too, something quiet but heavy. This wasn't about disrespect anymore, this was about access, about who had it and who thought they did, and as I folded the blanket and placed it back on the cot, smoothing it like I always did, I realized that the breakfast in the trash wasn't the worst part of yesterday. It was just the signal, the moment they stopped pretending I mattered at all, and people only stop pretending when they think they've already won, which meant one thing. Very clearly now, they believed I had no idea what was happening, and that belief was about to become their biggest mistake. By the third morning, I had learned the new rhythm of the house, the way sound traveled without ever landing on me, the way footsteps passed my door without slowing. The way conversations stopped just long enough when I entered a room and then resumed as if I were a piece of furniture. Ha ha ha, funny how quickly people adjust when they think you've accepted your place. And I played along because playing along buys time. I made coffee quietly, poured 3 cups instead of 2, placed theirs on the counter like always, and took mine to the corner of the kitchen where the light came in softer. No one said thank you, no one said anything at all, and I realized silence had become our shared language. Only they were using it to erase me and I was using it to listen. I watched how her purse never left her side now. How my son avoided certain topics completely, how money words made him cough or change the subject, and I started noticing how often they left the house together without telling me where they were going. How often packages arrived with her name on them but came inside under my roof. That thought floated up and stayed there longer than usual, because I hadn't said it in a while, hadn't claimed it even in my own head. And I wondered when that happened, when I stopped thinking of the house as mine and started thinking of myself as a guest. And the answer came quietly, in pieces, over time, in moments I'd ignored because they were easier to ignore. Like how they talked about renovations as if I were already gone, or how friends referred to the place as their house and no one corrected them, not even me. Sigh, that one stung a little when I let myself feel it. But feeling it also sharpened something else, awareness, because once you admit you've been pushed aside, you can finally see who's doing the pushing. I began to keep the blue notebook closer, not hidden anymore, just nearby. Under folded towels or beside detergent bottles, places no one ever looked, and every time something felt off, I wrote it down, not emotionally, just facts times words amounts, because facts don't argue back. Facts don't gaslight you, and slowly the story on those pages became clearer than the one they were telling upstairs. One afternoon, while they were out again, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Half expecting it not to work anymore, but it did, same password, same slow fan noise, and when the bank site loaded my heart thudded once, not fear, just anticipation, like waiting for a test result you already suspect. I scrolled through transactions carefully, each line clicking into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't wanted to see before, boutique charges, spa weekends, furniture deposits, groceries I didn't recognize, all under my name. All approved, all untouched by me, hahaha. The boldness of it almost impressed me, because this wasn't a mistake or confusion, this was routine, and routines only form when someone feels safe, when they believe no one is watching. And that realization didn't make me angry, it made me calm in a way that surprised me, because calm means you're past denial. I logged out, closed the laptop, and put it back exactly where I found it, no rush, no panic. Just order. And when they came home later with bags and laughter, I watched them from the hallway mirror, their reflections moving easily through the space, comfortable, careless, and I saw myself there too, standing still, watching. My face looking older maybe, but clearer, sharper around the eyes. That night at dinner she talked about a trip, Lake Tahoe, snow, cabins, laughed about how expensive everything was getting, and my son nodded along, adding comments, dreams, plans. And not once did either of them look at me, not once did they ask if I was okay with any of it, because in their minds I was already accounted for, handled. Placed neatly in the utility room like an old box you don't throw away yet but don't open either, I excused myself early, not because I was tired, but because I needed space to think, and as I sat on the cot again, notebook open, pen resting on the page, I realized something that made my chest feel oddly light. They weren't hiding anything from me anymore. They had stopped pretending I mattered enough to hide things from. And that kind of carelessness only happens right before people make mistakes, big ones. I wrote another entry, simple, they think I don't see, and under it, they are wrong. My hand didn't tremble as I wrote it, not even a little. Which felt strange because I'd spent months shaking over small things, words, looks, sighs, but now, faced with something real, something concrete, my body felt steady, grounded, like it finally understood what it was protecting. Later that night I heard her on the phone, voice low but sharp, talking about accounts, timelines. Once it's updated, she said, everything will be easier, and I smiled to myself in the dark, not because I knew exactly what she meant yet, but because I knew enough to stop being afraid of the unknown and start preparing for it. And as I lay there listening to the house settle, pipes clicking, doors closing, laughter fading, I thought about breakfast again, the eggs in the trash. The laughter, the insult, and it all felt smaller now, like the opening scene of a story whose ending they hadn't bothered to read, because they assumed it would favor them, and that assumption, that quiet certainty that I was done, was the most dangerous thing they'd given me, because it gave me room to observe, room to gather, room to wait, and waiting, I was learning, isn't passive when you're the only one paying attention, it's strategic. And as I closed my eyes that night, not to sleep but to rest my thoughts, I understood something with complete clarity. They thought they had already taken everything that mattered. But they hadn't even touched the one thing that still decided how this would end. By then I stopped reacting altogether, not because I felt nothing, but because reacting was no longer useful, and usefulness, I was learning, didn't look the way they thought it did, hahaha. I still made meals, still cleaned, still nodded when spoken to, but inside I had stepped back far enough to see the full picture, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every request now landed differently, every casual "can you sign this later?" Every "don't worry, I'll handle it" sounded less like help and more like positioning, and I began to notice how often my name came up when I wasn't in the room, how my son's voice softened when he spoke to her about me, like he was smoothing something over, making me smaller in advance. One afternoon she handed me a folder at the counter without ceremony, papers clipped, dense lines of text, and said it was just an update, nothing urgent, nothing important, and I almost laughed, not out loud, just inside, because everything important is always framed as nothing at all. I took the folder, flipped through slowly, not reading yet, just letting her watch me, letting her believe I was confused, dependent, and when she pointed to a signature line and said, "Just there," I nodded and said I'd do it later, and the look that crossed her face lasted only a second, but it was enough. Irritation mixed with surprise, because compliance had become expected, not requested. That night I went back to the locked drawer and pulled out the clear sleeve with the house documents, unfolded them carefully, and read every line again. Not because I needed to, but because repetition builds confidence. My name sat there clearly, first and only, dated years back, no additions, no transfers, no shared ownership, just truth printed in black ink. Solid and boring and undeniable, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to relief. Not joy, not triumph, just relief, like finding solid ground after walking on loose boards too long. I slid the papers back into place, locked the drawer, and sat for a while without moving, listening to the hum of the house above me, the sound of a life being lived as if I weren't part of it anymore, and that was fine. Because what they didn't know was that separation works both ways. The more they treated me like I was already gone, the easier it became to plan as if I actually was. The next morning she was unusually pleasant, smiling too much, offering coffee, asking if I was comfortable, and that shift told me everything I needed to know, because kindness that arrives suddenly is rarely about care, it's about timing, and sure enough, after breakfast she mentioned a streamlining idea. Joint accounts, easier access, less hassle, words that sound reasonable until you hear them stacked together, and I listened quietly, nodded, asked no questions, because questions slow things down and she wanted speed. I told her I'd think about it and she smiled again, tighter this time. My son stayed quiet, eyes on his phone, pretending not to hear, and that silence from him hurt in a dull way, not sharp, just heavy. Because silence from someone you raised feels different than silence from someone who married into your life. But even that feeling passed quickly, replaced by something steadier, resolve. I spent the rest of the day doing small, ordinary things. Folding towels, wiping surfaces, organizing drawers, not because they needed it, but because routine keeps your hands busy while your mind works, and my mind was working now, connecting timelines, imagining outcomes. Considering consequences, not emotionally but practically, because emotions burn out fast but plans don't. Later that evening I overheard them talking again, voices low but careless. She said something about "once it's finalized." And he responded with a laugh, and that laugh again, ha ha ha. It landed differently now, because laughter is loud confidence, and loud confidence often means people think the door has already closed behind them. They think there's no one left to stop what's coming. I sat on the cot that night and opened the notebook again, wrote one short line. They are rushing, and under it, that's good, because rushing leads to shortcuts and shortcuts leave marks. And marks are evidence. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay there in the dark listening to the house breathe, no longer feeling trapped by it, but separate from it, like I was already halfway out the door. And before sleep finally came, slow and shallow, I realized something that made my lips press together in a small, almost smile. They believed the hardest part was already over, that breaking me down had been the work. But the truth was much simpler. They had mistaken my quiet for weakness and weakness for permission, and in doing so, they had walked themselves right up to the edge of a mistake they wouldn't see until it was already too late. The next time we left the house together, it wasn't announced, it never was anymore. She just stood by the door with her keys already in hand and said we were running errands, like I was an item on the list, ha ha ha. And I followed because following lets you see things people reveal when they're relaxed. The car ride was quiet, not tense, just empty. My son drove, eyes forward, her phone already out, tapping, scrolling, smiling at things I wasn't meant to know about, and I kept my hands folded in my lap, knees pressed together, feeling the plastic bag at my feet dig slightly into my shin. not uncomfortable enough to complain, just enough to notice. Which seemed to be the theme of my life lately, noticing without reacting. We stopped at a restaurant I hadn't chosen, of course, hostess smiling, table for four, she said confidently. And I wondered briefly who the fourth person was supposed to be, until I realized it didn't matter. Numbers were flexible when it came to me. I took the seat at the end without being asked, cushion missing, leg wobbling slightly. And I adjusted myself so the table wouldn't shake. My son ordered quickly, her order followed, detailed, confident, and when the waiter looked at me, paused politely, I said just coffee, black, no sugar. He hesitated like he wanted to say something kind, then nodded, and she raised an eyebrow. You should eat, she said lightly. You skipped breakfast, and I almost laughed at that, not out loud, just inside. Because apparently breakfast only counted when it wasn't in the trash. The food came, steam rising, plates set down, her laughter loud as she told a story about a trip she was planning, Lake Tahoe, snow, cabins, deposits already paid. My son added details, jet skis, views, costs, and as they talked I watched her reach into her purse to pay, smooth motion, practiced. And when she handed the waiter her card my stomach tightened just a little, not fear, recognition. Because the blue stripe across the top looked familiar in a way that made my fingers curl against my palm, I told myself not to stare, not to jump, but when the waiter returned and handed it back. She slid it into her wallet without even glancing down, like it belonged there, like it always had. The ride home passed quietly again, bags shifted, something slid onto my lap, no one apologized. And when we pulled into the driveway, I felt something settle in my chest, not dread but certainty. That night, after they went upstairs, laughter muffled by walls, I pulled my laptop out from where I'd hidden it under the stairs, logged in slowly. Carefully, like I was afraid the screen might accuse me of something. The bank site loaded, the numbers appeared, and there it was, clear as day, the restaurant charge from earlier that afternoon, same amount, same card number, same name, mine. I scrolled back further, farther than I had before, and the pattern laid itself out without effort. Months of spending, not random, intentional trips, clothes, furniture, deposits. All layered under categories that made them look reasonable if you didn't look too closely. And I realized then that she hadn't stolen anything suddenly. She'd been borrowing me slowly, assuming I'd never add things up. Assuming my silence meant ignorance, and that assumption hurt more than the theft, because it meant they didn't think I was capable of understanding my own life. I closed the laptop, didn't cry, didn't gasp, just breathed out once. Long and steady, and if this story feels familiar to you, if you've ever been quiet while someone else spent your trust like it was endless, if you've ever watched your own life move without your permission, then maybe you should stay here. Maybe subscribe because these stories aren't about shouting or revenge, they're about what happens when someone stops pretending not to see. I put the laptop away exactly where it had been, wiped my fingerprints from the surface, habit. Not fear, and went to the utility room, opened the locked drawer, pulled out the folder again, this time not just to confirm, but to compare. I lined dates up in my head, matched transactions to moments I remembered, her sudden kindness. His silence, the way they spoke about the house like it was already theirs, and the realization landed quietly but firmly. This wasn't careless spending, it was preparation, and that meant something else too. They believed the last step was close. Close enough to stop being careful. Upstairs I heard her voice through the vent, excited, animated, telling someone, once it's updated, everything will be easier, and that sentence stayed with me long after the house went quiet again. Because people only say things like that when they believe the hard part is over, when they think control has already changed hands. I sat on the cot, folder resting on my knees, and smiled for the first time in days, not a happy smile. Just a small one, because now I knew exactly what they were waiting for, and more importantly, what they thought I had already given them. And as I locked the drawer and slid the key back into my pocket, I realized the breakfast, the laughter. The trash, all of it had been noise. The real story had always been about money, access, and timing. And the best part, the part they couldn't see coming, was that timing, finally, was no longer on their side. After that night, I stopped second-guessing myself, not because doubt disappeared, but because doubt had done its job already. It had forced me to look, and once you've looked long enough, you don't look away again, ha. The house felt different now, not hostile, just exposed, like I could see the seams in everything, the way conversations paused when I entered, the way her smile arrived too quickly and left too slowly. The way my son's silence grew heavier each day, not protective, not loving, just convenient, and I moved through it all calmly, deliberately, as if nothing had changed because nothing visible had, and that was important. Appearances keep people careless. One afternoon she asked me to sign something quickly, standing at the counter, pen already uncapped. Her voice light like this was a favor she was doing for me, and I took the paper. Skimmed just enough to recognize the structure, dense lines, official tone, words meant to blur together so you trust the pointing finger instead of the page. She tapped the bottom line with the pen. Just there, she said again. Like repetition made it safer, and I nodded, smiled faintly, said I'd do it later because my hand was tired. a small excuse, almost fragile, and I saw irritation flicker across her face before she masked it. That flicker mattered. Because irritation means urgency, and urgency means mistakes. That night I sat on the cot and rehearsed nothing, didn't plan speeches, didn't imagine confrontations. I just organized, scanned documents, photographed pages. Backed things up twice, labeled files clearly, boring work, careful work, the kind that doesn't feel powerful until it's finished. Upstairs they laughed, glasses clinked, chairs scraped, guests came and went. People who smiled politely at me and then forgot my name 5 minutes later. People who spoke about renovations, transfers, finally putting things in our name, and no one corrected them, not even my son. And that silence from him hurt in a way that surprised me again, a dull ache behind the ribs, but it didn't slow me down, because love that doesn't protect you isn't something you can rely on when it counts later. When the house finally quieted, I moved softly, no rush, no nerves, lifted the fruit bowl from the counter and pressed a small recorder beneath it. Adhesive holding firm, blinking light turned down, hidden by habit, not secrecy. Because she talked when she thought no one listened. She always had. I replaced the bowl exactly where it had been, bananas bruised on the same side, apple facing out. Alignment matters when you don't want to be noticed. Then I went back to the utility room and wrote in the notebook again, just one line. They are confident, and under it, that makes them loud, because loud people explain themselves even when they shouldn't. The next day she was cheerful. Unusually so, offered coffee, asked if I slept well, mentioned paperwork again, timelines, banks, approvals, her voice smooth but fast, like she was afraid momentum might slow if she stopped talking. My son hovered nearby, pretending to check his phone, not meeting my eyes, and I nodded, said very little, watched everything, listened to the recorder later when the house emptied, her voice clear, sharp, confident, talking about accounts, access. How once the bank updates everything, she won't have a say. The way she said it so casually made my stomach flip once, not fear, disbelief, that someone could erase another person so easily in their mind. I didn't stop the recording early, didn't rush, let her talk herself into clarity, let the truth spill out in her own words. Then I turned it off, saved the file, labeled it with the date, and sat back, breathing evenly. Because at that moment, something important shifted again, the balance, not emotionally, legally, practically, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with noise, just clicks into place quietly, like a lock finally turning the right way. I looked around the small room at the folded blanket, the narrow cot, the locked drawer, and I felt no bitterness toward it anymore. This wasn't exile now, it was staging, the place where things come together before they move. And as I lay down that night, listening to the house hum above me, I understood something that made my chest feel strangely light. They believed they were counting down to their win, celebrating it already. But they didn't realize the countdown had started in the opposite direction, and when it reached 0, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be dramatic, it would be official, and they wouldn't be able to laugh their way out of it anymore. From the outside, nothing changed, and that was the part they misunderstood the most. Ha. They thought progress had a look, a mood, a visible shift in behavior, but real change happens quietly under the surface. While everyone else keeps talking, and I let them talk about timelines, about upgrades, about how much easier life would be once everything was settled. Those words floated through the house like decorations already hung for a celebration that hadn't happened yet, and I moved among them calmly, pouring coffee, wiping counters, nodding when spoken to, playing the role they'd already written for me because roles keep people predictable, and predictability keeps them careless. She brought the papers back again 2 days later, same folder, same pen, same casual tone. This time placing it directly in front of me like she was tired of waiting. We just need this done, she said, smiling, and I could feel the impatience beneath it, the belief that time was on her side. I picked up the pen slowly, let my fingers rest on it a moment, felt the weight, the familiarity, and then I signed, carefully, deliberately, not rushing, not shaking, tracing a version of my name that looked right at a glance but wasn't, a curve slightly wider. A line placed just a fraction lower, enough to be mine but not usable, a detail only noticed when someone actually checks, and she didn't check, she never did. She smiled, relieved. Grabbed the papers and slid them into her purse without another thought, because in her mind the last door had just closed behind me. That night she was almost kind, laughing louder, planning openly, talking about renovations again. About guests, about how good it would feel when things were official, and I listened from the hallway, feeling no urge to interrupt, because people reveal their assumptions when they think they've won, and her assumptions were loud now, careless. Full of confidence, my son joined in, adding details, agreeing, laughing in that same soft way that had once hurt and now just confirmed what I already knew. He believed this too, believed it was done. That whatever line he thought he'd crossed couldn't be uncrossed anymore, and that realization settled in my chest heavily for a moment, not anger, grief. Because there is something uniquely painful about realizing your child has chosen convenience over conscience, but even that grief passed, replaced by resolve, because grief can slow you down if you let it, and I couldn't afford that now. Later, when the house quieted, I sat on the cot and reviewed everything again: documents, recordings, screenshots, timestamps, making sure nothing relied on memory alone, because memory can be questioned but records don't argue. And as I worked, I noticed how steady my hands were: no tremor, no rush, just clarity, and that steadiness told me something important. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was executing. Upstairs, a door slammed, footsteps paced. Voices rose briefly, then settled, the sound of people who thought the future was already arranged in their favor. I closed the folder, slid it into the tote bag I'd prepared days ago, placed it neatly under the cot, and lay back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of electricity, the distant sound of a television laugh track. And I almost laughed too, quietly, because the irony was sharp. They thought the signature had ended my say, when in fact it had simply confirmed their intent, and intent, once documented, becomes something else entirely. Something that doesn't fade with excuses or apologies. The next morning she was glowing, cheerful, humming as she moved around the kitchen, talking about brunch plans, about how busy things were going to be soon, and I watched her from the doorway, thinking how strange it was that people celebrate before results, how they mistake motion for success. And as I stepped back into the utility room, locking the drawer one last time, I understood something with absolute certainty. They believed they were waiting for a call that would seal their future. But they didn't realize a different call was already scheduled, one they wouldn't control, one they wouldn't laugh through, and when it came, it wouldn't ask them for permission first. The call didn't come the way they expected it to, and that was almost funny in a quiet way, ha, because they had imagined some smooth confirmation, a polite voice saying everything was approved, everything complete. But instead the phone rang while I was stirring coffee, slow circles, spoon tapping once against the mug, and I didn't look up when she answered it, didn't need to, because I heard the shift immediately, the way her voice tightened mid-sentence. The pause that stretched just a little too long. "What do you mean frozen?" she said, laughing once like it was a misunderstanding, like laughter could push words back into the phone. My son looked up then, finally, eyes flicking from her face to the counter, to me, then back to her, and I kept stirring, watching the surface of the coffee settle. No ripples, no foam, just stillness. Her voice grew sharper, questions tumbling over each other, dates, names. Approvals, she said something about paperwork, signatures, how everything had been sent, and then she went quiet, listening, really listening now, because the tone on the other end had changed, the kind of tone that doesn't negotiate, that explains. Calmly, officially, my son reached for his phone when she pulled hers away from her ear, his face already pale, already bracing, and when he spoke his voice was lower than I'd ever heard it, careful, almost pleading. "There has to be a mistake," he said, pacing a step, then another, "but mistakes don't get reviewed like this. Mistakes don't trigger holds and audits and quiet questions that start with dates and end with words like authorization." I set the spoon down gently, wiped it once on the towel, and took a sip of coffee, lukewarm now but steady in my hands. Behind me voices overlapped, frustration, confusion, blame beginning to leak into the room. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she paced, saying my name once, then stopping herself like she wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The word fraud floated through the air briefly, not loud, just enough to land. And my son froze when the voice on his phone changed too, firmer now, slower. "They're saying the account is locked," he said quietly, "all of it," and silence fell heavy after that, the kind that presses on your ears. The kind that makes people realize something has moved without them. She whispered, "That's not possible," and I almost smiled, because impossible is just another word people use before they understand they were wrong. I didn't turn around yet, didn't need to rush the moment, because the weight of it was doing the work for me. Then he said it, softer, like saying it too loudly might make it real. "They're saying the house," he stopped, swallowed, tried again. "They're saying the house is still in your name," and that was when I turned, not dramatically, just enough to face them. The folder already resting on the counter where I'd placed it earlier without comment, one page missing, already scanned. Already sent. Her mouth opened then closed, her confidence cracking in real time. My son stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years, not as background, not as furniture, but as the person standing between him and everything he thought was secure. Voices continued on the phone, explanations, next steps, reviews, but they weren't listening anymore. They were watching me, waiting for something, anger, triumph, explanation, but I gave them none of it because the call hadn't changed anything for me. It had only confirmed what I already knew, that the power they thought they had was never theirs to take. And as the room filled with panic and overlapping questions, I picked up my mug, finished the last sip, and placed it back on the counter carefully, because even now, even here, I wasn't rushing, and that calm, more than the frozen accounts or the locked cards or the sudden fear in their voices, was what finally unsettled them the most, because panic makes noise, but certainty doesn't. And they were just beginning to understand which one of us had it now. After the calls ended, the house didn't go quiet the way it usually did. It buzzed, hummed, filled with sharp movements and sharper words, drawers opening too fast. Papers being spread out and gathered again like that might change what had already been said. Ha ha ha. It was strange watching them scramble in the same rooms where I had learned to move slowly, carefully. As if speed alone could undo what patience had already finished, my son paced from kitchen to hallway and back again, running his hands through his hair, saying my name now without hesitation, without the softness he used before. Her voice cut in over his, blaming timelines, banks, forms, me, anything that wasn't herself, and I stood near the doorway, not blocking, not leaving, just present, and presence I was learning. Can feel like pressure when people aren't used to it. She finally turned to me fully then, eyes sharp again but unfocused. Like she wasn't sure where to aim the anger. You knew, she said, not asking, and I nodded once, small, calm. Not defensive because knowing isn't a crime, using isn't either, but taking without permission is, and they both knew that now. My son tried to speak, stumbled, started again, words piling up without direction. Apologies mixed with excuses, the kind that sound sincere until you realize they're aimed at saving comfort, not repairing damage. I listened without interrupting, because listening costs nothing and reveals everything. And when he finally stopped, breath uneven, waiting, I said quietly that the bank had all the records, that the signatures were being reviewed, that the house documents were already confirmed, no emotion, no accusation, just facts. Her face drained then, not pale exactly, but empty, like someone had pulled the plug on a story she'd been telling herself for too long. Upstairs a phone rang again, then another, voices rose, then fell, panic giving way to calculation. Because panic only lasts until people realize they need a new plan, she whispered to him that maybe they could fix this, maybe it was just a hold, maybe they could talk their way through it, and he nodded too quickly. Clinging to that hope like it was solid, but I could hear the change in their voices now, the way certainty had drained out of them and left questions behind, questions they had never planned to ask. I walked past them toward the hallway. Not because I was done, but because the conversation no longer needed me in it, and that seemed to unsettle them more than any argument could have. My son followed a step behind, voice softer now, almost small. Mom, wait, he said. And I did pause, not for him, but for myself, for the weight of that word, Mom, how easily it had been dropped when it was inconvenient, and how quickly it was picked up again when things started to fall apart. I turned just enough to look at him, not unkindly, not warmly either, and said that I wasn't angry, that anger would have meant this still hurt the way it used to, and that what I felt now was clarity. The kind that doesn't shake when voices rise. He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut in sharply, saying this was all unnecessary, dramatic, fixable, her tone already shifting toward control again. But control is hard to reclaim once it's been exposed, and I could see it in the way her hands moved too fast, the way her eyes darted toward the counter where the folder lay open. Quiet, undeniable. I picked it up then, slid it under my arm, and said I'd be making arrangements, not threatening, not announcing, just stating, and the word arrangements seemed to hit them harder than anything else, because arrangements mean change. And change was the one thing they had believed they controlled. I walked toward the utility room one last time, gathered the few things that were truly mine, notebook, folder, keys, and when I closed the drawer and locked it, the sound was soft. Almost gentle, but it echoed in my head like punctuation, finishing a sentence that had been building for months. Upstairs footsteps stopped, voices lowered, the house seemed to hold its breath, and as I stood there with my coat in my hands, I understood something that felt almost sad in its simplicity. They hadn't lost because they were cruel or careless, they had lost because they believed silence meant surrender. And that belief had blinded them to the fact that the quietest person in the house had been the only one paying attention all along. The movers arrived early, the kind of early that doesn't apologize for itself, and I was already awake, already dressed, already packed, 2 suitcases by the door and 1 small tote on the chair, nothing extra. Nothing sentimental except what fit in my hands. The utility room looked smaller without my things, like it had always been temporary and was finally admitting it. The house above me was still, not peaceful, just stunned. My son came down the stairs when he heard the voices outside, his face gray, eyes tired, and when he said my name this time it wasn't sharp or rushed, it was unsure, like he didn't know which version of me he was speaking to anymore. I handed him an envelope without ceremony. He stared at it before taking it, fingers shaking slightly. Inside was everything laid out clearly, dates, amounts, records, not accusations, just facts, repayment schedules included. Because accountability doesn't need anger to be firm, he tried to speak, started with an apology, then an explanation, then stopped when he realized none of it would change what had already been done. Upstairs I heard her pacing. Drawers opening, something slammed, then quiet, and I didn't go up to see her. Didn't need to. I picked up my coat, paused at the doorframe for a moment, rested my hand there, feeling the solid wood. Remembering the years when this place held laughter that wasn't sharp, mornings that weren't careful, and I let that memory sit without fighting it. Grief doesn't always need fixing, sometimes it just needs space. Then I stepped outside. The air cool and clean, the kind that wakes you up without effort. The truck doors closed, the engine started, and when the car pulled away, I didn't look back right away, not out of strength, just habit. Later that afternoon, a message came through from the locksmith. Locks changed, codes reset. I didn't reply. I unpacked slowly in the new place, hung one coat, placed one mug on the counter, the chipped one she hated, still wrapped in a dish towel. Still intact, I didn't unwrap it immediately. Some things deserve a pause. Outside, the light shifted across the floor. Quiet, unbothered, I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, turned the knob, and waited for the sound to rise. No one interrupted. No one asked for anything, no footsteps above me, no voices through walls, just the steady hum of a life that finally belonged to me again. I woke before the sun the next morning, not because I had to, but because I could. Opened the window, let the cool air in, unwrapped the mug carefully, placed it on the counter. The small crack still there, not hidden, not broken either. Water boiled, coffee brewed, steam rose slowly, and when I poured it, I didn't rush. Didn't spill a drop, my hands steady, my breath even. My phone buzzed once on the table. A simple notification, account secured, review closed. I locked the screen, set the phone aside, and sat down, alone but not lonely. Quiet but not small, and as I lifted the mug and took the first sip, I realized something that felt like peace, not the loud kind, just the kind that stays. That silence doesn't mean you've lost. Sometimes it means you're listening. Sometimes it means you're waiting, and sometimes, when used carefully, it's how you take everything back without raising your voice at all. And if you believe in quiet strength, in stories where dignity survives even when respect doesn't, then stay here, subscribe for more stories like this, because some endings don't need shouting to be heard, they just need time and the courage to stop pretending you don't see what's right in front of you.